Powerful.
This is killing business.
Don't we all love this sound? If there is one thing that defines RPG games, I would say is the ability to make your character stronger. Exactly this was missing from my game. So I get to work. First thing that I did was to research how unit stats and stat calculation is done in other games. The result of this research was this huge spreadsheet that basically gives me all the formulas that I need. Here are some examples of how I made it work. First, you calculate your primary stats. In my case, this is might, dexterity and knowledge. Then you calculate all the secondary stats, like for example HP, mana, damage, armor and other. Each secondary type is affected by different primary stats. For example, HP is affected by might, mana is affected by knowledge, armor is affected by dexterity and so on. For some of the secondary attributes, it was important to add diminishing returns. For example, physical resist, magic resist. We want to do this to prevent players from stacking up huge numbers of defense attributes and basically making their champions invincible. After I've got the formulas figured out, I also needed to know how much experience each unit Q awards and how much experience it will be distributed among champions in the battlefield. Once I had those two components, I had to implement the experience gain in Unity. And then I quickly realized that there is no visual indication when the champion gain level and becomes stronger. That meant only one thing. I needed some kind of visual effect. But I don't have any idea how to do visual effects. I knew what I had to do.
A few moments later.
Here is how the effect looks in-game. After I was ready with the stats, I needed a way to visualize them in the UI. First, I did some designs in Figma, so I had a better idea on how it will look when implemented in Unity. Here it is how it looks now. We have different sections for this modal. The first one is, like, of course, the unit champion portrait with HP and mana. Then you have all the main stats, like damage, armor, action points, movement points, and then the primary skill. Also here I'm listing the debuffs, the skills available, the inventory, the items inventory, and the units inventory. So this is how currently it looks. It might take some changes in the future, but for now it's this. While doing the army details modal, I quickly realized that I will need some kind of tooltip system so I can display additional information to the players. I had to do two kinds of tooltips: dynamic position tooltips and static tooltips. For the dynamic tooltips, it was very important to respect the boundaries of the screen, which means that if my tooltip, for example, is in the top right corner or in the bottom left, we should not cut the tooltip and it should be visible at all times. Initially, the tooltips I did were working only for the UI, but I wanted them to also work when the user inspects elements on the map. Now we can inspect all elements in the map, and I have the ability to show either generic label tooltip or very custom tooltip for special map elements, such as town details tooltip or army details tooltip. Of course, we can have more custom ones in the future. While working on the game, I sometimes get overwhelmed and exhausted by some complex mechanic. That's why I try to mix much harder tasks with easier ones. Keeping that in mind, here comes the next one. After I started experimenting with different 3D models like the castle, I realized that there is no way for the player to distinguish his own units and buildings from the enemy and the neutral ones. I knew I had to add some kind of team colors to the game. I was wondering how to properly do this and how other games are doing that. Since I will be using low poly 3D models for the game, I came up with the idea that I can have a different texture palettes for the different teams. This means that basically all of the 3D models in the game will use the same texture, but the only difference will be this special section in the texture that is dedicated for the team colors. And here I want to give special thanks to Impenzia, or I'm not sure if this is how his name is pronounced, for this great help that he's doing. Like, he's doing a ton of YouTube video tutorials on Blender, which I really appreciate. While I was reviewing how the battle works, I noticed something important was missing. There were no indication of how much damage your attack did or how much experience you gained. I had to implement some form of floating text system. So here it is. It's relatively simple. For now I have 3 modes: normal, experience and critical hit. But it can be extended, of course. One important thing I did from technical point of view is to use pool to reuse the game object instead of spawning new ones every time. This should help me in case I need to spawn a lot of floating text in the future. It was fun and relaxing working on this one. Last but not least is probably the biggest work that I have done so far. I guess it was better to move this into separate video, but yeah, I guess I'll talk about it now. Units inventory management. In a game like the one that I'm making, I can argue that the units and items management are one of the places where the players spend most of their time. So I had to make sure I do it right. From start, I knew that the units and item inventories will be very similar. That's why I tried to code the underlying inventory system in a generic way so it can work for both units and items. I also wanted to give the player different ways to split or manage the units. Here's a list of all the types of manipulations that you can do in the inventory. The first is the simplest, drag and drop move. This is just self-explanatory. You should be able to drag and drop the unit and place it in another slot. Second one is drag and drop swap. So basically this means that if the units are not the same type, we swap their positions. The third one is drag and drop merge. Here basically if the units are of the same type and they're not champions, we merge them. Number 4 is control split. Control clicking on a unity extracts one unit of the same type as a separate one. This is kind of needed mechanic because players usually want to create those kind of meat shields from gameplay point of view, where you want this like one unit to get the attacks to itself and protect the more valuable units. So it's a important one. Number 5 is shift split. So this one means shift clicking on a unit stack tries to equalize all of the unit stacks of the same type. Let me give you an example. So if you have 40 spiders and you shift click on them, you will now have 2 by 20 spiders. If you click again, you will now have one stack of 14 and then 2 stacks of 13 spiders. The last one is manual shift split. So this one, what it does is if you hold shift while dropping a unit, split UI, it's a special UI, right? So a split UI will pop up and the player will be allowed to manually control how many units remain when split, basically. And I say the last one, but there is one more actually. It's in the town details modal. You have those buttons that you can move the whole army in the castle or outside the castle. Maybe here it's worth mentioning that I have this ability to have like 2 armies in the castles at the same time. So one of the armies, this one on the left, is like the guardian army, and the other one is like on the right is the visiting army. So you usually want to exchange units within the castle and outside of the castle. Here I have to mention that big part of the work I was making for all those inventory actions is related with networking. So technically you need to be sure that every manipulation that you do on your unit's inventory is also reflected on the network and the server, and reflected to other players. Now that I'm mentioning this, it reminds me that I spent probably 1 week refactoring all of my state data models to be identical on the server and the client, because previously they were not, and I had a lot of code duplication. Now it's way better. And that's it for now, guys. I think it's decent progress. Next I'll probably continue work on the town details modal, because this is one of the core gameplay elements that is missing. And here I mean the ability to construct buildings and train troops. I think I showed you the town details UI concept in the previous video. That will probably a ton of work, but at the same time it sounds kind of interesting. So I'm excited for this. So yeah, I really hope you like those devlog videos. If this is the case, please consider pressing the like button and subscribing for more future content. And that's it for me. Stay safe and have fun. Cheers.